Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to the revision of chapter number 4 of auditing. Very important chapter, and that is called as audit evidence. Okay. Now this comes under the so-called tricky chapters or difficult chapters in the syllabus. Why I say so is because this has the maximum carry forward in the CA final portion. So your chapter number 3 risk assessment internal control, chapter number 4 audit evidence, chapter number 7 that is completion and review, and chapter number 10 that is audit of banks. These chapters, if it is very strong, you have a very good chance of even scoring 70 plus in auditing, which our past students have done very nicely. So I will request you all that please ensure that these chapters are done properly. In the earlier syllabus also these chapters were there, and hence 70 plus was possible in the earlier syllabus also. And in this syllabus, the new syllabus of ICI, we have chapter number 3, 4, 7 and 10. Okay. Now let's start with chapter number 4 revision, that is audit evidence. Let's start. Please see here. First of all, we are entering a standard called SA 500. So SA 500, let's do a quick recap of it. So first of all, what do you mean by audit evidence? So audit evidence means what? Audit evidence includes accounting records and anything that authenticates the accounting records and supports the auditor's rationale. Okay. Next is, sir, when we are gathering audit evidence, the audit evidence should be sufficient and it should be appropriate. What is the measure, or what are the factors that influence the sufficiency of the evidence? That factors is mass, that is materiality, risk of material misstatement, and size of the population. Sir, what are the factors that affect the appropriateness of a data, appropriateness of information that the auditor takes? And those two factors are the data should be relevant and the data should be reliable. Okay. Next is, when will you rely more on the audit evidence? आप कब ज़्यादा rely करोगे? In which cases will you rely more on the audit evidence? First is independent sources outside the entity, internal controls being more effective, auditor directly obtains that evidence, the evidence is available in documentary form, and finally you have original documents. So the last O point is original document. So you have a code called INDO. Next point is, sir, when we are gathering this audit evidence to reach reasonable assurance, sir, that audit evidence that we are taking, so to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence to perform the audit procedures, what all activities can the auditor do? What are the procedures that the auditor can do? So we have confirmation, analytical procedures, inspection, inquiry, recalculation, reperformance, and observation. In this way, we have to remember this. Okay, that is a part of SA 500. So this chart represents here SA 500 and a part of that. Okay, so there are other things also in SA 500. We'll take a look now. Now after that, let's go to the next part. Let's see this. Okay. Now, how does the auditor obtain reasonable assurance? So this I think we have done many times in the class. So the auditor does something called as risk assessment procedures, so which you know very well as analytical procedures, observation, inquiry, inspection. Auditor will do, and the auditor will do further audit procedures. Means after doing the risk assessment procedures and knowing the risk, the auditor will now do his other work in relation to his auditing part. So auditor will do something called as test of controls, and the auditor will do something called as a substantive procedures. Test of controls is basically the auditor checking the controls and seeing how much he can rely on the controls. And substantive procedures are the auditor's test of details that the auditor does, or the analytical procedure that the auditor does. Substantive analytical procedure, that is part of your substantive procedures. You can see here includes the test of details and it includes the substantive analytical procedures. Okay. Let's go further to the next area. Now we are doing assertions. Sir, auditor has to gather evidence regarding which matters. So these are divided into three parts here. First, assertions about transactions, assertions about account balances, and other assertions about disclosures. Assertions about transactions in terms of hand action, it will be very simple. So it is basically occurrence, completeness, cutoff, classification, and accuracy. So you will see this answer here. So I'll just tell you the marking. You can see here occurrence, completeness, cutoff, classification, and accuracy. Okay. All the students are watching this video always realize that this is a revision video in the class. In depth, each and every point is covered in class. Normally we take audit for around 95 hours to 100 hours in the classroom. So you understand auditing is done in a lot of depth. This chapter by itself takes around 14 hours, 12 to 16 hours I can say, to teach. So you have to understand that when we are doing the revision, it is in a much more compressed manner. So this is just for the students who have already done auditing with me or who have not done with me. That is also not a problem. But this is just for a quick recall of the points. It is not for in-depth explanation. Okay, for in-depth explanation, separate videos I'll be uploading on YouTube. Okay, that is basically this. So tell me, what are the assertions about transactions? You have occurrence, completeness, cutoff, classification, and accuracy. What are the assertions about account balances? Let's see this. Assertions about account balances. You have existence, rights and obligation, completeness and valuation. So you have existence, rights and obligations, completeness and valuation and allocation. Then finally, what are the assertions about disclosures? You have occurrence, completeness, classification and accuracy. So you can see your occurrence and rights and obligations, completeness, classification and understandability, and finally accuracy and valuation. That is covered in this part. Okay, that is in relation to the assertions part. Let's go further. Now, there is a concept that is there in your syllabus called as audit trail. Important concept, very nice one. What is audit trail? Audit trail is nothing but the documented flow of transaction is called audit trail. Okay. Sir, when we look at any source document and from that when we pass accounting entry, from that we can see the amount in the financial statements. Now, when we look at the financial statement and if we can trace back the accounting entry, from the accounting entry, if we can trace back the source document. Example, if you see sales in the financial statement, if you can trace back the journal entry and the ledger posting in relation to sales, and from that, if you can check the sales invoice, that is a source document, it means that the audit trail is there in place. Okay. Now, audit trail authentication and integrity should is very, very important. And they have given some few points regarding audit trail. Very important if you ask me from short note perspective. So do it properly, please here. In if you have audit trail in place, you can track many types of transactions. You can maintain the records are maintained, and the user activity in the system is logged. So basically, user activity and system is logged. Logged means everything is recorded. Which user logged in at what time and passed which entry. I normally give this example that in the bank when you open a fixed deposit or when you open a let's say savings account, then the employee who has logged in and who has opened the savings account for you or the fixed deposit for you, that employee's name also gets noted by the system because we need to know which person maintained this record. That is called user activity and system. Next is expenditure. Whenever you maintain audit trail, you are spending money in relation to the system, and just by spending the money on the system and storing the data doesn't help. You have to also analyze the data in depth. Even that is very, very important. Okay. Next is if audit trail is there in place and it generates confidence in the auditors. And finally, your controls can be verified whether the policy procedures of the company are working or not. So you have a simple code here called True Coco. True Coco. Simple. Okay. Next, we enter into a very nice part, and that is known as the management expert, the matter in relation to management expert. Now, this has three answers. So, all the students who have my chart will easily know what I'm talking about. This has three answers. First point you should understand relying on the management expert. So, they have given there as per as the 700 audit evidence. So, management expert regarding the management expert, what all will you check? So, see significance of management expert for the auditor purposes. What all will you check? The auditor shall, to the extent necessary, having regard to the significance of the auditor's expert for the auditor's purpose, check what matters regarding the auditor's expert. So first is I'll check that person. So I'll check that person's competence. I'll check his capability. I'll check the objectivity of that expert. Second, I'll understand his work. So that is basically obtain understanding of the work of the auditor expert. Now, after I have checked the person by checking his competence, capability, and his objectivity, and after I have checked what work he has done, now I'll see how his work is useful for me as an audit evidence. So that is basically appropriateness of the expert's work as audit evidence. That is what I'm looking at. Simple. Now, second question is, whenever the expert gives you any kind of information, so any information produced by the entity, it means through the management expert, when the management expert gives any information, the information should have some quality and it should be, look here, accurate, it should be complete, it should be precise, it should be detailed. And if you want to use a code, you can use a simple code called packed. Packed is what? Precise, accurate, complete, detailed. You can say precise, accurate, complete, and detailed. Okay. Finally, we go to the last point, and that is, sir, whenever we are obtaining audit evidence to decide our nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. You can see here, see the auditor's nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. So if I am the auditor and if I have to decide my nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures, so regarding the management expert, what all factors should I check? So they are basically this is factors that affect the nature, timing, and extent of my audit procedures in relation to the management expert's work. Okay. So the first point is I'll look at the nature and complexity of the matter. I'll just show it in this manner 1 minute. Okay. I'll look at the nature and complexity of the matter. I'll look at the risk of material misstatement in the matter, how risky the matter is. Point number three is I'll look at are there any alternate sources available or is this the only way I can get the information. Next point is in relation to the nature, scope, objective of the management expert's work. What kind of work the management expert has done. After that, I'm going to the fifth point you can see below, the nature and extent of any controls within the entity. So what are the controls within the entity over the management expert's work? So how does the entity means the organization, control the management expert's work? Second is, does any person from our management, from the client's management, that is the directors or let you can say in the accounting department some higher authority person, can they exercise control over the management expert work? Do they have any kind of connection with the management expert? Okay, now after that you have the next point, that is in relation to, sir, we look at the technical performance standards that the management expert has used. So after that we look into, sir, the whether the management expert is employed or is he an outside party. So we look at his knowledge and experience of the auditor in terms of working with the management expert in the past. So let's say I'm in my fourth year of audit. In the last 3 years also, I've worked with the management expert in the past. Then in that case, I'm checking his knowledge and my knowledge and experience regarding working with that management expert. And finally, my previous experience in relation to that expert's work. So I'm looking at my previous experience that I've had working with that expert. Okay. So these are the points that are there. Very, very nice, very easy points. You have to do it in a proper manner. And in the class, we did a code called Manco C. If you remember Manco C, you can use that code here. Okay, Manco C. Let's go further. Let's go further. Now we are entering into the next part. That is, this is a read area. You can go through it. It's a very simple part. Now let's go on to the next area, that is called audit sampling. Now audit sampling is SA 530, very, very important standard in my opinion. Probably if you ask me, top three most important standards in auditing. Those are SF 530, that is this audit sampling. Then you have SF 570 going concern and SF 580, that is written representation. If you ask me, but anything can come in the examination, but ensure that these three at least you're doing it very, very nicely because the same gets carried forward into CA final as well. Okay, so let's look into this. First is audit sampling, that is SA 530. Let's look into this matter. First, what is the meaning of sampling? Sampling means when you apply the audit procedures to less than 100% of items within the population, and you have to ensure that all sampling units have an equal chance of selection, or all sampling units have a chance of selection. Basically means that you cannot exclude any of the samples, any of the invoices you cannot exclude, any of the controls you cannot exclude. You should keep all in your contention, and then from that you can select. That is, all sampling units should have a chance of selection. Okay. Let's go further. What is the scope of SA 530? So the auditor can use his approach can either be statistical or it can be non-statistical. Okay. So let's go further in this and we'll do this in much more depth. Just a second. Okay. Now, whenever the auditor is doing the auditing, so in that case, the auditor is looking at the population, and from the population, the auditor is taking out sample unit one by one, and in the end whatever the auditor selects, in the end whatever he checks, that is called as sample size. It is called sample size. Now sample size should be representative of the population, and now the auditor, how he takes from the population and how he checks the data, that is called as auditor's approach. Okay, if the auditor's approach is not in what I taught you is it does not have the RMS feature. RMS is nothing but it does not have random selection or mathematics and probability theory, or let's say sample risk measurement is not done, and the auditor purely uses his experience and judgment. In that case, it is called non-statistical sampling. But where the auditor uses random selection, auditor uses mathematics and probability theory, auditor keeps in mind the sample risk measurement, then it becomes more scientific, and that is why it is called statistical approach. Okay, that is called statistical sampling approach. Always remember the approach, whatever you select, whether you select statistical sampling or non-statistical sampling, it does not determine the sample size ever. Never determine the sample size, because sample size is decided because of lack of time and other inherent limitations, and not because of the approach that the auditor takes. Always remember that. Okay, let's go further. Let's go into the other areas. Now, I'll request you all to understand what is population. Population is basically the entire set of data that the auditor gets regarding any matter. Example, let's say all sales transactions given to me, all sales invoices given to me will be called as sales population. And sample can be expected to be representative of the population. Okay. Population, whenever we check, what are the basic characteristics of a population? Population should be given to the auditor, or the data should be given to the auditor with care. Care is what? Completeness, appropriateness, and reliability. So you have the code here called care. Simple. Okay. Let's go further. Now, The advantage of statistical sampling may be summarized as follows, and I have given a code for this called better score. In the class, I told you all that please ensure that you are writing this answer and doing it. You have to practice this answer properly and then you're doing it. Please see here. First is better description of large mass of data than a complete examination of all data is the first advantage. Second is sample size does not increase the size of the area or the population tested. Third is you are taking a calculated risk. So whenever you are doing statistical sampling or whatever software you are using, the software should be coded in such a way that it is aware that the auditor is taking a calculated risk. Okay. Next is the approach is more objective, therefore it is more defensible in the court of law. More objective means it is more based on numbers and facts and not subjective matter. And finally, keeping in mind risk and precision, you are deciding the minimum sample size. You are deciding the minimum sample size. Okay. And I hope you remember we had taken this example in the class while teaching. I told you that internal controls, then you have the internal auditor and the previous experience of the auditor for 4 branches: Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai. This example we had done in the class. Okay. Let's go further. Let's see further. Now, there is a read answer which I had given you the marking in the class, and we had just discussed this. That is non-statistical sampling. A short note can come in the exam. Remember, non-statistical sampling is basically the auditor using his judgment and experience and not using technology per se, or not using, let's say, audit tools in a way, or not having the feature of RMS basically, that is random selection in mathematics or probability theory, or where sample risk measurement is done. Auditor is just keeping in mind that, okay, this is what I have experienced in the past audit, and this is how I need to carry on this year's audit. That is called non-statistical sampling. You can go through this part. Okay, important areas I have given the marking. Next area you have sampling or the traditional method of auditing. So in this case, again, whenever the auditor does sampling versus the auditor does traditional method of auditing. So what are the differences in this? When the auditor does traditional method of auditing, in that case, you will understand the auditor feels like checking everything. But when the auditor does sampling, he is not checking everything. And that the over the year, the auditor has come to know that this is a better approach, because whenever you select sample out of items which are similar in nature, you will get the sample will represent the population in one way or the other. So checking everything doesn't make sense, especially when you have lack of time. In fact, checking less but taking good samples makes more sense. Okay, let's go further. Now we are entering the next area. There is an important area starts in relation to sampling here. That is, factors that should be considered for deciding upon the extent of checking of on a sampling plan are the following. So this we had done in the class. First is, please see here, your size of the organization. If the organization size is more, then your extent of checking on sampling plan will also be more. Your effort will also be more. Your state of internal control, if it is weak, then your extent of checking on sampling plan will be more. Then adequacy and reliability of books of accounts, if they are very good, books of accounts are kept properly, very nicely, then your extent of checking on sampling plan will be less, because the effort taken will be less. Okay, because the organization is already much more organized in maintaining the books and records. If the tolerable error range is more, remember this example which I had given in the class, the temperature example, this example, student 1, student 2. In this, I told that the girl's tolerable error range is more and the boy's tolerable error range in this case, in the example, is less. So the person who's having more tolerable error range, or the more tolerable rate of deviation, that person will be facing less risk, and the person who has less tolerable error range or less tolerable rate of deviation will be facing more risk. Okay, so this example we have done in the class, and that example had a flow to it. Okay, let's go further. So tolerable error range, if it is more, then the action of checking of sampling plan will be less. Finally, if your degree of desired confidence is more, if you want to obtain more satisfaction from the controls perspective, in that case, your extent of checking on sampling plan will be more. You will prefer checking more areas in relation to this part. Okay, so that you want to reach a higher level in relation to test of controls, so that your substantive procedures eventually will be less. Okay, let's go further. Let's go further. Now we are entering the last part of this. We are dividing this chapter 4 videos into two parts, part 1 and part 2. Now we are entering the last part of part 1. Okay, so that is the sampling process. For sampling process, I had given this diagram to you all, which covers it in a very nice manner. So let's do it one by one, and I hope you will do it with me in a proper manner. Let's see this. Sir, sample design. In sample design, what do we take care, sir? The auditor does his audit procedures to reach the purpose. Auditor obtains audit evidence as per say 500, and in there can be misstatement. So the line can go up. If the line goes up, the auditor has to bring the line down. by giving a response to the risk. Sir, whenever the auditor does audit procedures, the auditor can either go for something called as value weighted selection, or the auditor can go for something called as stratification, or the auditor can combine both, and the auditor can do his audit work. So for some transaction or some types of transaction, he can use stratification, and for some types of transaction, he can also use value weighted selection. Purely depends on the auditor's judgment. Okay. Let's go further. That is the sample size. The sample size that the auditor selects, this is the most important area. I'm marking this as a star, a very, very important area. Factors that influence sample size in case of test of control. So remove the diagram which I have given you in your textbook and let's do it one by one. Please see here. Sir, if the risk assessment with the auditor is required to do more, in that case the sample size will be more, but the advantage will be that risk of material misstatement will be less. So if the auditor desired level of confidence is more, then the auditor sample size will increase. Sir, if the tolerable rate of deviation is more, then the sample size will be less. So if the expected rate of deviation is more, then the sample size will also be more because you're expecting more risk. Remember that CA exam, BCom exam example which I gave you. After that, we saw, sir, if the large population is there, in that case, the sample size will increase, but only negligibly. So if small population is there, auditor should not go for sampling itself. Auditor should, in fact, check all the transactions. Remember the Rolls-Royce example, Rolls-Royce versus Maruti Suzuki example which I had given in the class. Comfortable? Now, these parts, this cover your sample size, factors influencing sample size in case of test of controls. Now, what are the factors that influence sample size in the case of test of detail? Let's go for it. When the risk of material misstatement is more, the effort required is more, so ideally the sample size should increase. If the tolerable misstatement is more, the sample size will be less. If the expected misstatement is more, then the sample size will be more. If large population is there, then the sample size will not increase in proportionate manner. It will increase only negligibly. Small population is there, auditor should not even think of doing the sampling. Auditor should in fact check all the transactions. Okay, sampling is not an alternative way of getting the audit evidence. Auditor can check all the transactions and get the data because the sample size is less. Next is if stratification is done, it's a good thing because the stratification is done, then sample size will be less because the auditor has grouped the transaction in a much more what you call efficient manner, proper manner. Okay, and finally last point will be if after doing one of the substantive procedures, that is, let's say, analytical procedure the auditor does, and if he gets more audit evidence from that, then from the other substantive procedure, that is test of details, the auditor's sample size will be less because he has to put lesser effort. Because from the earlier process only, the auditor has obtained great amount of evidence. Okay, let's go further. Sample selection methods. We had done a very nice code, and I think students love this code called Harabomzi. Remember Harabomzi, that is haphazard sampling, random sampling. Remember random sampling has two parts, simple random sampling and stratified sampling. Then you have block selection, then monetary unit sampling, and finally you have systematic sampling. Systematic sampling has one more name called as interval sampling. That is why after S I have put a simple I, small I there. So systematic sampling is also known as interval sampling. Remember this for MCQs. Next, whenever the auditor does audit procedures, just a second, I'll go for another color. Whenever the auditor does audit procedures, the auditor does audit procedures to reach its purpose, that is the RA level, as you know. Sir, if the audit procedures is not applicable on an item, then auditor has to perform the audit procedures on a replacement item. So if a replacement item is available, remember check number 35001 is suppose not no, is cancelled check. Then but check number 35002 is available. The company is telling, see, this is the another check we had to make because the earlier check because of some mistake we had to cancel it. Then in that case, is the replacement item available? The answer is yes. If audit procedures cannot be applied, then in that case, in case of test of controls, we call it as a deviation. In the case of certain procedures, we call it as a misstatement. Okay. Now, whenever you check the deviation or the misstatement, the auditor has to see whether it has any common feature or not. See, if common feature is there, no, then the auditor has to make a list, identify all items having the common feature, and the auditor has to evaluate the possible effects on the audit procedures. Basically, the auditor has to see whether these common features, how much misstatement are they um, relating to. So how much misstatement is happening because of these common features. Suppose if there is an item and that is the only item in the entire population where error is there, other item seems to be fine. I had given the TDS example in the class. Let's say TDS was deducted wrongly for a certain employee. But when we check for all the other employees in the same department or for that month, all the other employees in the company, other than this one employee, for all the employees, TDS computation was proper. no problem. So this one employee regarding with the TDS computation was incorrect. For that, that is called as an anomaly. Anomaly means common feature is not there. That is a one-off error. So auditor has to obtain a high degree of certainty that it doesn't represent the population. It should not be representative of the population. Okay. Now finally, what will the auditor do? You can see this arrow coming here. So the arrow is coming from here. So whenever the auditor finds a list of misstatements, auditor should obtain a broad view of the scale of misstatements, and that is called projected misstatements. Auditor should also present to the management the anomalous misstatement, that is an anomaly that is excluded from the projected misstatements. And finally, the auditor should give it to the management to correct it and check if even after giving to the management and telling them what all to correct, if the management still leaves it uncorrected, then the auditor will see whether uncorrected misstatements are material or not. That is what the auditor will check. Okay, let's go for the last point, that is evaluating the results of sampling. Auditor will check the results of the sample, whether sample provides a reasonable basis of conclusion about the population. So whether the sample is providing a proper conclusion about the population. Okay, that gives us a quick revision in relation to chapter number 4 part 1. Please ensure that you are sharing these videos with your friends and helping them, and also ensure that you're commenting in the comment section. And if you're liking these revision videos, do type in the comment section, sir, thanks a lot, this is really helping me in my preparation, or sir, thanks a lot, sir, just before the exam I just saw this video and one of the questions came and I could clearly think about this session and I could write it. All these comments when you write, either for me or any other faculty, any other teacher who is teaching you and who is putting an effort on YouTube, and when you give such a comment, that really boosts our morale. It really motivates us to give more and more videos to the students. And this I'm telling from an honest perspective. So ensure that you are commenting in the comment section, and you're of course liking the video if you like it, and please do share it with your friends. I wish you all the very best. Take care. See you. Bye bye.